At that time, it was 12 o'clock when I finally fell asleep. In that sleep, I felt like I was being pulled, floating towards a place. I didn't know what kind of place it was because it was unclear, but there were torches around. In that place, I was surrounded by 4 people, but because it was pitch dark, their faces were only faintly visible. However, I knew who they were. In the dream, they reminded me not to interfere. Just before they could throw a punch, I woke up. When I looked at the clock on my phone, it showed 3 a.m. Later, when I went back to my hometown, I told my mother about this, but I didn't describe the faces of the 4 people. Then my mother asked me if those 4 people were she mentioned their names, and I confirmed it. My mother then told me that her friend had come to the house asking for help. She was ill, but strangely, the doctor couldn't find any illness. Additionally, she often experienced possession. It turns out that my mother has a gift from God related to supernatural things, as many of her family members do. After investigating, it was found that the curse involved soil from 4 graves in haunted cemeteries. Each of the 4 people I saw in my dream had taken soil from a grave to combine and use as a weapon. It turns out my mother had also received similar threats to not interfere. Eventually, my mother decided not to get involved out of necessity. The holiday was over, and I returned to my usual activities in the capital city. After a month in the city, I started having strange dreams again. In the dream, I was sleeping in my rented room when the door opened, and a dog and a frightening creature, Budo Ijo, but colored red, stood at the door. Budo Ijo is a fictional human character who depicts a black or evil figure. In the blink of an eye, I didn't understand why I suddenly moved from my rented room to my home, and then, in another blink, to a dense forest. Not far from where I stood, many creatures were watching me from behind the trees. They began to approach me, including the red Budo and the dog, and among them was a woman dressed entirely in green. Then, a young, brave man wearing a robe and turban ran towards me and grabbed me, saying, "Run." We continued through the forest and stopped when we saw several people in turbans and robes reciting prayers in a circle, like religious leaders. The man who had grabbed my hand said, "Please help my friend. He's being chased by creatures." The creatures were in front of us, and a fierce battle ensued between them and the religious leaders. The leaders won the battle. As it ended, the sound of the call to prayer echoed in the forest, waking me up, and it was also the dawn prayer call in the real world.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
In August, when I went back to my hometown, I told my mother about the dream. It turned out that on the day I had the dream, my mother had a visitor, a young girl still in elementary school, who came with her neighbor. The girl's neck was stiff and bent to the side, almost looking broken, and it happened suddenly without any clear cause, not from a fall or sleeping wrong. My mother asked why the girl came with her neighbor and where her parents were. The neighbor explained that the girl's parents were out of town, and she lived with her grandmother. Before their business slowed down, she lived with her parents, but after the business slowed down, she was sent to live with her grandmother. When my mother touched the girl's neck, she immediately saw flashes of events that caused the girl's condition. The girl's father was at his lowest point, wanting his business to be as successful as it once was. He thought of a quick solution and went to a place to perform a ritual for wealth. The last condition given by the shaman was to break the neck of a chick with his hands. As he tried to do this, he thought of his daughter and decided not to go through with it. A few days later, my mother had another visitor, a young girl also in elementary school. She had a stomachache that didn't get better despite visiting the doctor. The pain started after eating food from a neighbor. It was discovered that the girl was intended to be a sacrifice for wealth in a haunted forest. According to rumors, the neighbor had performed a ritual for wealth, said the girl's mother. My mother then told me that recently, villagers and people in the surrounding area often saw a tall creature and a ghostly woman. People suspected these creatures were part of a ritual searching for their master since they appeared after the death of the person rumored to have performed the ritual. At the end of August, I went to Jakarta again. After just a few days in Jakarta, precisely in early September, on a Monday, I experienced something beyond reason. I wasn't at my boarding house on Saturday and Sunday because I had a reporting assignment. On Monday afternoon, I arrived at the boarding house. The complex was quiet since the neighbors were still at work. My roommate, David, was also out. After the midday prayer, I took a nap. I woke up around 3:30 p.m., performed ablution, and prayed. By 4:30 p.m., I was hungry, so I went out to get some food. I returned around 4:45 p.m. with my meal. After eating, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. As I stepped out, I felt something trying to enter my back, causing me to lurch forward, almost falling. My back felt heavy, and there was a lump. When I tried to touch it, I couldn't, even though it was close to my nape. I felt unwell late into the night. At midnight, David returned, showered, prayed, and read the Quran. As he read, my back felt hot. After he finished, I asked him to check my back. David was shocked to see that it was red and had a lump. I then asked him to place his hand on the lump while reciting prayers and salutations. My body reacted immediately, like someone being possessed. David said my body stiffened and my voice became authoritative, like an old man's. Then it changed to the sound of a crying woman. David panicked and woke me up, asking me to seek forgiveness. It was the first time I experienced something like this again after a long time. That night, I had a vivid dream, like watching a movie and being part of the scene. In the dream, I was in a village that looked like it was from the past. In the evening, I walked through the village and was startled by the presence of a disheveled woman with a bloody face. I ran to a house with furniture exactly like mine, where my mother and younger brother were. I then learned that after evening prayers, a blood-covered woman who kidnapped people for rituals would appear. The scene shifted suddenly, and we found ourselves in the yard of a large house. A child accidentally opened a basement, revealing many people who had been kidnapped. The child reported to his mother, who came with 8 others. The child was suddenly dragged into the basement. The villagers became enraged and killed the family in the house, consisting of 3 women, one of whom was pregnant, and a man. My family and I could only watch unnoticed. My mother suggested we go home before it got dark. As we left, we were blocked by snakes but managed to pass. We arrived home, where the furniture was the same, though the house style was different. My brother and I prayed, then went to the back window to close the curtains and saw 2 blood-covered women. My mother returned, telling us that the 8 villagers who killed the family didn't survive. Suddenly, my great-grandfather, who had died in Mecca, appeared and said that the incident had occurred around 80 years ago. I immediately called my mother and found out she had the same dream. Our family had often experienced supernatural attacks, like fireballs, salt, and flowers in our yard. All we could do was surrender to God. According to my mother, an evil spirit from the past was used by a shaman at someone's request to attack our family.